He's VP of Global Automation and 3D Printing at Jabil. That's one of the largest contract manufacturers in the world. Many of you have heard of this company before. I've known John for probably a lot longer than we'd like to admit, going back multiple companies. Right now, he's VP of Digital Manufacturing for Jabil. Before that, he was President and Chief Executive Officer at Adept Technology, where he was also the President of Robotics. He's involved with the Robotics Technology Consortium, with the IFR, the International Federation of Robotics, and also contributed to the U.S. Robotics Research Roadmap, which is done every 3 or 4 years. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce John, and he's speaking today on producing commercial class robotics systems. Take it away.
Thanks, Dan. There, maybe that'll work better. Thanks, Dan. It really is an honor to be here. I think all of you really should feel good about being part of this inaugural event. It's looked like to be a very exciting thing going forward. I'm always worried about robots and, kind of robots continuing to move forward and you hear all this stuff about taking jobs and stuff. And in fact, I was on 60 Minutes. I'll talk about that in a moment. But one thing that I did not worry about in my life was that robots were going to replace me on a Segway. So that really set some reason for concern. In any event, as Dan said, I've done a lot of stuff, but I'm probably most recognized for my 15 minutes of fame. Actually, it was about a minute and a half on 60 Minutes 5 years ago, talking about robots and the impact it was going to have on society. Interestingly, we spent 4 hours of videotaping to get down to a minute of airtime, so really impressive. But it does show kind of the power of mass media. The day after that launched, our stock volume was 10x what it was the hours before. So it kind of shows the power of broad media. I want to talk about 4 things: industry trends, impact on manufacturing, some thoughts that I have and we have about how we engage with companies and kind of the product innovation cycle, especially in this world of digital today. And lastly, talk about enterprise class customers. Damien's talk was really awesome. I love the level of technology. I'm fortunately not going to get to that level for you, so because I can't. So I'm going to stay kind of at a little bit higher level. Let me start with Jabil. Who has heard of Jabil before today? Wow, that's getting better. For the last 3 or 4 years, I asked that question, and we hired a head of marketing 2 years ago, and prior to that, nobody had ever heard of us. I always say we're the largest $20 billion company that nobody's heard of. We do scale really well, 100 factories, 15,000 CNCs. We hired 30,000 people in 6 weeks for one of our factories in China a couple summers ago. Kind of crazy things. What I'm most proud of is that we're one of the only pure manufacturing companies that's shown up on Forbes, on Fortune's most admired list, which is really quite a statement about the company. So it's a great time to be in robots. Anybody here from Soft Robotics? Congratulations on your funding. I'm an old school guy. Could never have imagined that a gripper company could raise $20 million to fund their business. But it really underscores just where this industry is today. A bunch of high profile takeouts. My former company sold to Omron. Teradyne's bought a couple of robot companies, High Watermark, Kiva Systems, which seemed like a crazy price for a company. And actually, if you look at where it is today, it was an incredible value for Amazon. So really remarkable. Lots of funding going on startups. If you're starting a company, it's really great news because you can raise money, especially if you're aligned to a market. But not to be the old guy in the room, it wasn't always like this. When I started in the industry a few years ago, Dan and I's mileage in the world, it wasn't going so great. Robots got ahead of the expectations. GM cut $88 million worth of orders to GMF, and the industry went into a bit of a downturn, but it's great to see where it stands today. Frank can appreciate that, I'm sure. It's not just in the fundraising, it's in the statistics. The last several years, you map out the next several years, we're gonna see a 5x increase in the number of robots sold on an annual basis by 2020. 10-year period. That's really pretty remarkable. Since we're in Boston, we'll talk about Boston Consulting Group. They put a forecast together about where robots are going in the industry. What I like about this is in 2014, they gave a number, and then 3 years later, 2017, they said, hey, we got to revise it upward because we underestimated where this is going. Growth across all segments. So again, it's a great time to be in robots. Let's talk 10-year increments. Let's go back 10 years. Anyone remember they were January 9th, 2007? Just to pick a random date out of the air. Well, if you were there, Nokia was a leading mobile phone company. BlackBerry was a leading smartphone company. Facebook was relatively young, 10 million users, 50 million in revenue. Today they have 1.5 billion users and $500 billion market cap. Tesla, which is now the 4th largest car company by market value, which is crazy. Was still 2 years away from a product. Netflix, oh yeah, they were doing DVDs. Anyone still buy DVDs? No Uber, Lyft, Instagram, any of those companies. It's a really, really crazy world today in terms of how things are changing. If you look at robots, GM was the largest user. Foxconn and Amazon have just dwarfed the auto industry in terms of usage over the last 10 years. Kiva, we talked about the takeout. They were doing their first installation far before what they've done for the robots they put into Amazon. No collaborative robot category. You hadn't even launched a product yet. And yes, on January 9, 2007, that's when Apple launched the iPhone. I'll talk a little bit more about that because I think that's been a transformative product and affects everything that all of us do today. Apple had revenues of $19 billion at the time. Today they have $150 billion. So, changing times. Time is changing too. Standard & Poor's. When I was a young guy, companies used to live on the Standard & Poor's for 50 to 60 years. Today it's 20 and it's trending down to 10. I like that quote from one CEO, I no longer fear failure, I fear irrelevance. It's not just Standard & Poor's. What to take to get the mainstream product, 50 million users. It took the airline industry 68 years. Took Pokemon Go 19 days. Things have changed a little bit. So, how do you think about innovating in a world that's so dynamic and so transformative and so changing? First, I don't think you start with the product. I'll come back and talk about the product in a moment, but I think you'd start with what the universe looks like. So let me just kind of touch on 5 big innovative trends that I think are going to impact everything all of us in the room do here. Anyone see this movie? I guess I'm aging myself again. We're going to have fun in a moment, I guess. But any movie that has De Niro in it, and Morgan Freeman's a good movie in my book about a bunch of retirees who took on a bank that stole their pension. Any case, there's more and more of these old people movies. You know why? Because there's more and more old people. I hate to say it, but we're all getting old. In 2015, there were 900 million people over 60. By 2050, there's going to be twice as many people, and they're going to almost make up twice the population. Huge issue as we think about the aging population. Lots of opportunity for people in this room to help. You look at China, it's even far more pronounced. The blue line is 20 to 24-year-olds. The darker blue line, 65 and above. You can see a massive shift in the distribution of people and the aging population. Why does that matter? I'm not going to kind of go through all the social impact and the other aspects of it. Let me just focus on manufacturing. This graph on the right, look at the bar chart at the right side, put together by the Wall Street Journal. They said to make an iPhone 7, it cost $225 to make it in China. If you shifted that to the US and made it with high-cost labor, same manufacturing process, it would add $80 to $90. That's a 40% increase in the cost of the product. And when you look at what's happening structurally with the aging population and the lack of younger people all over the world, we're going to face things like this unless there's ways to get productivity up. Luckily for all of you in this room, you can help get productivity up and help drive those kinds of curves. So one trend is aging population. The second is what I call the next major demographic group. How many people here are under 35? Oh, man. So, does this describe you? How many of you are narcissistic? Live at home with your parents? Guess it doesn't. Interestingly, millennials are the next big thing. I hate to say it for anybody who's my age, but we're a dying breed. Really interestingly about millennials, an interesting statistic is that by a factor of 2 to 1, they trust YouTube more than they trust news anchors. Think about that. If you grew up in a world where we thought news anchors were credible. The reason we talk about millennials is this. This is a demographic chart. Recently, millennials passed baby boomers as the largest demographic population in the United States. Why does that matter? Because they vote. And they vote not only politically, but they vote with their pocketbook. If you look what happened over the last 50 years, companies just tailored their whole product offerings to baby boomers. In the 60s, they brought Mustangs to market because baby boomers had become 20 to 25 years old. In the 70s, they brought Pampers to market because they had babies. In the 80s, they brought minivans because they had families. And now they have Viagra. So, follow that trend out. As I tell my kids who are kind of at the bottom end of they're not quite millennials, I said, I hate to say it, but you're going to spend your entire life looking up at this big demographic pool that's going to have everything catered to them because they matter so much. Sorry, life sucks. Second big demographic trend is the rise of the individual empowerment. You're seeing it all over the world. You look at what's gone on in the Middle East with these uprisings in terms of political uprisings in countries. You look at the Me Too movement or Black Lives Matter. There is just a firestorm of individuals rising up and making statements. It's happening because middle class has risen, education has become more accessible, technology's everywhere, and social media has become a vehicle that you can really put your voice out there. So individual empowerment is really going to be a huge trend to deal with. So what does an empowered individual customer look like? Does look empowered to me. Millennials have 38% have tattoos, and 50% have more than one. Who's got tattoos? Okay, never mind. Empowerment really goes well beyond that. It does go to personalization more than your body. There's a whole trend going on today about personalization, whether it's shoes, eyeglasses, earbuds, food, you name it. Personalization is a big trend. Empowered consumers are much more tech savvy. They're more mobile. They know how to pay with their phones. They know how to check prices when they're in the stores. They're able to be informed, which is the next level. When I was younger and buying cars, you went into a car dealership and you went through this exhaustive negotiation because the car dealer had all the power. That's no more. Our consumers today are fully informed and fully literate on what's going on, and they can make informed choices. Fourth is peer-to-peer choices. We talked about YouTube and how millennials put value in YouTube versus news anchors. They also put value in peer-to-peer ratings. Who looks at peer-to-peer ratings? Everybody now. It isn't about third-party endorsements. It's about what you're rating on whatever the score is. And lastly, it's instant gratification, 2-day shipping from Amazon, Google Express, you name it, we want it now. And all of this really defines a new consumer that is going to really drive the demands of products and really touch anything that anybody does. So empowered consumers, second. Third big trend is urbanization. This has really been a long run since the 1950s and earlier, where only 30% of people lived in urban environments. By 2050, 70% of the population is going to live in cities, big cities. As well as the population is going to get to 9.5 billion. So we're going to have a bunch of new big cities out there. Start practicing your pronunciation because all those bubbles on the right side of that graph are going to be household names to you in the next 30 years. And notice only 2 of them are in the North American continent. So what does urbanization mean? It means enormous stress on our infrastructure, highways, roads, power, food, on the environment, water, clean air, you name it, services, how you can get trash out, police, fire, and socially, education, housing, medical, all of that stuff is going to be incredibly stressed as these cities get bigger and bigger and more people move into those cities. That's why Frank takes his boat around the world, because it's a nice, safe place to be. So that kind of leads into the 4th big trend, which is sustainability, environmental sustainability. The UN has put together a map of 17 things that they think are really important to a long-term global sustainable world: water, food, poverty, a host of things. I'm not going to get into that here because it's way outside the charter, but it does land with all of us in an area called corporate social responsibility, CSR, or some people call it the circle economy. It's really about how do you focus not just on profit, but on the planet and people, the 3 Ps. What does it look like? It looks like Nestle, good food, good life. Looks like GE, eco-imagination. Looks like Coke. Down in the lower right corner is what Jabil does. We have a huge commitment around CSR. We have a requirement for every plant manager to reinvest a certain amount of the profits into the local community. We got some awesome stories about how we've uplifted places in far-reaching parts of the world because of the fact that we're there hiring people, which is great. The one I like is in the upper right corner, a company called Eileen Fisher. They had a 65-year-old part-time grandmother who started to take back clothes from their customers who had worn them and wanted to get rid of them. She repurposed them. Today, it's a $500 million business for them, reselling clothes. Corporate sustainability is going to be a huge trend for all of us to deal with. And then the last one is cybersecurity. I don't need to spend much time on this other than to say that we don't want this guy taking our data or stealing our passwords. It's a huge issue for enterprise customers like Jabil. Lots of money's being spent there. Lots of money's being lost there. And what you don't want to have happen is what happened to Equifax, which when they had a data breach, they lost 40% of their market cap in a matter of days. Facebook saw a similar impact. The way it lands here is that manufacturing has twice the level of incidence of any other industry, and more than the top 3 or 4 combined. And when you think about an Industry 4.0 world where we're going to have a lot more cyber, security is going to become a huge issue for customers who are in that space. So 5 big trends. How do they land in manufacturing? I like this work from Supply Chain Management magazine put forth. So if you look at the last 100 years, manufacturing has been focused on capacity. How do we get bigger? How do we get scale? How do we drive productivity? And then where's the lowest cost place to land manufacturing? Jabil's benefited from that. We've got 100 factories around the world, and 2/3 of them sit in low-cost labor regions. We've been a big part of riding that trend for the last 100 years, or last 50 years, I guess, for us. So where does that take us? The future is about capabilities and fulfilling customers in a more agile and responsive way than it is about capacity. And that lands with 7 capabilities. One is knowledge workers, not robots, but people. Knowledge workers really driving it, operating in a sustainable way, an ability to produce lot size of 1 at the same cost structure as lot size of thousands. An agile and responsible manufacturing footprint, which includes robots, but isn't driven by robots, isn't controlled by robots. A distributed, more localized footprint placed in urbanized areas. If your population sits in a geography, you want to produce near that geography. We're going to start to see manufacturing look more like warehousing in the future, where it's located in the regions where customers consume. Obviously, it's digitally driven, and it's secure. It can't be otherwise. So big shift in how manufacturing is going to think about it. For Jabil, when we think about factory of the future, we think about it kind of in this way. Think about a corporate information backbone. Obviously, it's got to be secure. It's got to have a single instance of truth. It's got to be real time because we're robot guys, pervasive, blah, blah, blah. But really it's about how do you optimize the manufacturing process? How do you optimize equipment? How do you optimize manufacturing yields and processes? How do you get to real-time collaboration? How do you leverage machine learning so things adapt on the fly? And how do you drive a mass customization strategy? At the device level, we think about it as on-time delivery. We run a just-in-time manufacturing operation. We got to be able to get things to the line automatically and have it fully traceable. We think about standard work cells. You know, the kiss of death in our world is customization. So, you know, if we're going to put in a piece of equipment, it's really difficult to scale it if it's customized. So we really look for how do you get to repeatable standard solutions that we can replicate across a range of applications. Capabilities and processes are going to be cornerstone to companies like us. It's important that they become parameterized so that we can have agility with those processes. Robots, of course, but robots need to be intermixed with people. You know, we need a very agile, flexible, dynamic workforce of robots and people, all with highly integrated sensing so that they can be interchangeable. Workers alongside people, and lastly, 3D printing. Let me say something about 3D printing that I think is really impactful. We just took a project that we took a medical display housing for an LCD panel display, 39-piece assembly that we redesigned and printed in 2 parts. So if you don't think 3D printing's coming, it is. And if you don't think it's going to have an impact on robots, it is. Because if you're in the business of putting stuff together, there's going to be a lot less stuff to put together in the future when you can integrate designs into single platforms. GE's done a lot of great work there. So that's factory. Let me come back to products now and talk about kind of the innovation side of things. Our Radius group, which is our ideation, talks about products as really the intersection of technology, business, and humanics or people. And really the intersection of those three is really how to think about it. So let me just kind of dissect those a little bit. I won't get into too much detail here, but you start with technology. There's a tidal wave coming to us. I think we all feel it in terms of technology and the iteration of technology that's happening. McKinsey put out a study that said that by 2025, they've identified 12 key technologies. They're going to represent $33 trillion worth of market value. Those 12 are mobile internet. Doesn't take any rocket science to figure that out. Augmented knowledge work. Automated knowledge work. Anybody talk to a chatbot lately? This whole thing about natural language processing is really enabling a whole new level of automation and knowledge work. Internet of Things, Cisco said 50,000 connected devices by 2020. Cloud, we're all in the cloud today. Robots, autonomous vehicles. I thought this was really interesting. There was an article just last week about Google, the delivery vehicle for their autonomous vehicle technology is going to be ride sharing, and that they're going to make an enormous impact to ride sharing. Ride sharing is supposed to be a $150 billion market by 2025. Genomics, oil and gas, we talked 3D printing, material science. When I went to school, I never thought much of the material scientists. Today, they're responsible really for every major innovation that occurs. There's some aspect of material science that really drives it, energy and so forth. The interesting thing to me is that almost all of those have some relation to robotics and are going to impact robotics. So as I think about technologies in the digital age, I like this analogy. Sheet of paper folded 50 times, how far does it go? The sun. 93 million miles. So it's the power of exponentials. I think Damien covered, kind of that perspective in terms of what he's doing. It's Moore's law. It's basically that the computing power that put a man on the moon, when you double the performance of transistors every 18 months, ends up in a device that's the size of your hand, will soon end up on your wrist, and will go way times that. Huge power of exponentials, long curve in terms of what's been happening in terms of technology innovation. To me, the way it lands in robots is really simple. Industrial robots today is a $14 billion market. By world standards, that's pretty small. Automotive is a $2 trillion market, semiconductors a $400 million market, cloud computing 300, smartphones 300, anyways, on and on and on. To me, robots is about exponentials. It's about riding these exponential technology curves in related industries to robots that really drives adoption. So where does robots fit on this curve? Right there, that little red line. So hard to drive technology from within the industry. It's about adopting it from outside. Let me give you an example from my experience. When I left Adept 5 years ago, we had two kind of cornerstone products. We had our Lynx, which was our mobile platform, and we had our Cobra, which is our Scara robot. Had a bunch of technologies around it that really made that possible. You know, you kind of walk through this over a 5-year period. So start at the top, cloud. There was no public clouds. Everything was proprietary. There was no Alexa, Siri, no language, no natural language processing. Can't tell you how many robots I saw at CES this year that were basically an Alexa with the body around it. Factories didn't have Wi-Fi. Processors were 1/10 the speed. So imagine you can do a 10x the performance. Windows was the preferred UI. Anybody putting Windows in anymore? No, it's smartphone based. All pennants were custom and wired. 3D printing, you know, we were excited to get our Lynx product, get the first version of it 3D printed, the housings. Today, and in the very near future, the links of the robot are going to be manufactured as 3D printed items. Imagine if you can optimize the geometry and get those things to be perfect strength to weight ratios. That's coming very quickly. Battery life, applications, we talked about navigation. Sensing is just crazy how it's come down in cost and price over that period of time. And AI, we used to call it neural networks, not deep learning. So anyways, all that stuff has had a dramatic change over a 5-year period. The way it lands is the robot that we sold in 2013 for a certain price, Epson just launched a new product last fall, half the cost. Brought to market in a fraction amount of the time. So 5 years, robot prices have been cut in half. Another 5 years, who knows how much further they'll come down. All driven by these exponential trends around technology. Okay, let me come back to that January 9th, 2007 date, launch of the iPhone. I think this is a generational product by almost every measure you can. Statistically, iPhones are 20% of the unit volumes of smartphones, half the revenue, and 80% of the profit. It's not bad. It's also a $150 billion revenue stream for Apple. So Jobs famously launched it as 3 products in one. Let me just kind of recast that a little bit. Huge impact on UIs. Everybody thinks about UIs now based off of what Apple drove. I mean, imagine going back to the keyboard and the little screen, you know, and that's kind of been Apple's MO for a number of years. Whether it's the computer, the iPod, or watches, they always have an innovative way to think about how to engage with customers. They also drive a whole new school of ideation. Every product you see today in the consumer space kind of draws from this thinking process. And lastly, they drove a user experience that has really kind of defined how to think about products. Anyone who got an Apple product, taking it out of the box as an experience, it's part of an introduction to their ecosystem and their strategy. So 3 products in one. I think UI, UX is huge. Enormously impactful to the success of a product. I can't do it justice here. We've got a whole group at Jabil that does this to help customers kind of refine their thinking on products and branding and UI or UX. Let me give you just a couple of simple things to think about. I got a stereo about 10 years ago. This is the remote control that came with it, and the 70-page user's manual that came along with that. So anytime I want to pull out and do something with it, I pull out that manual and get to work. Obviously, Apple redefined a whole different thinking process around that. And really what this is about simplicity. How do you take a really complicated set of things and reduce it down? I think Jobs had said that I want on the click wheel, be able to get back to home in less than 3 clicks. So you can't ever get further than 3 clicks away from the home screen. So one way is about how do you simplify it? The other way to think about UI, UX is familiar. So when we developed the Lynx, one of the things that we drew on was blinkers in cars. Obviously, everybody's pretty familiar when you see a blinker to a car, what it means it's going to do. So we put blinkers on the side of our robots. Communicate status intent that could easily be adapted by the industry because it was familiar to people. Another example of that is Windows, of course, desktop, recycling bin, folders, documents, even looks like some people's desks, I guess. About familiarity. So simple and familiarity are kind of the two things around adapting to people. Okay, let me just wrap up on iPhone. I want to talk about a number of questions that I think you need to ask as if you're going to get in the product business. I think this is the perfect digital product. And if you want to think about creating a robot system, you can draw a lot of knowledge around this. I talked about the UI, UX. Of course, that's really powerful. The sensor integration is unbelievable in these platforms now, and every version increases that amount of sensing, whether it's GPS, gyroscopes, proximity sensors, 3D cameras. Every version is driving that to drive functionality and drive UI. Security, of course, comes for free. Whole ecosystem around the analytics associated with it at all levels of the solution. Community, network effect, I'll talk about that because I think that's really powerful in digital products. And lastly, a really ready-made digital distribution channel that creates a marketplace for apps, third-party products, and a whole new way for companies in that ecosystem to make money. And to me, that's a perfect digital product. So, what does a perfect digital product do? It disrupts industries. So, take your pick. Phones, music players, cameras, calculators, payment systems, watches. It's unbelievable. All the way down to the poor guys who make mosquito repellent who don't know yet that phones can emit a frequency that can repel mosquitoes, and they're going to lose their business because of this crazy product is in a completely different industry. Kind of amazing. But anyways, it has really disrupted a whole host of industries, and that's really what digital can do. So, 5 questions I think you need to ask that I see over and over again. One is, are you a platform or are you a solutions company? So you kind of think about a technology stack, a solution set starting at technology, kind of built into a platform, a product, an application, and ultimately a solution. And kind of the further out you go, the closer you get to solving a customer or a market problem. So platform companies focus on the inner rings. And really the result of a platform is how do you deliver a partial solution that allows other partners to add value to it to deliver a solution to the ultimate end customer. And then that allows you with the little blue areas to partner to solve the outer rings, the application and the service delivery area. And it's a really powerful concept. You can invest a fraction of the cost it would take in developing a full solution and reach a wide range of markets, which is really powerful. The challenge for platform companies is that nobody wants to work in those outer rings unless you have a viable platform. And for you to prove that you have a viable platform takes a huge investment in marketing and business development and partnerships to prove that you're going to be around for the long haul so people will invest in it. But one half of this is platforms. Most industrial robot companies are platform companies. They don't solve problems. They work through partnerships to deliver solutions to customers. Other side of the equation is solutions. And solution companies focus on the outer rings. How do you deliver a full solution to a customer? How do you create an HMI that makes sense? Do you have spare parts? What's your delivery solution? Where's the documentation? Kind of an end-to-end solution. And that's where ultimately there's a tremendous amount of value. So when we, to draw, I guess, on my back, when we came out with the Lynx product, I wanted to go on the right side and make a solution because to me, that's where the real opportunity is and where the value is. But we had a company its DNA was rooted in the platform side, and there was just no way to change that DNA to restructure it. So we went down the platform path. We had a number of partnerships that took us into semiconductor, logistics, healthcare, and other industries. We captured a fraction of the revenue, and they were able to help us get to the markets. By contrast, what Kiva and what Intuitive Surgical do, they're solutions companies. And interestingly enough, while the vast majority of robot companies sit on the platform side, the most successful ones really sit on the solution side. And if you really want to get funded, it's about how do you align to a market that you can deliver a solution. So platform or solution. Next level up is an ecosystem. not a product. I think that's really valuable. It's essentially a platform on steroids. Ecosystems are interconnected environments where you have a number of organisms or players that breed off of each other. And we won't do a biology lesson here, but we'll talk about it from a business standpoint. Gartner defines an ecosystem as open, a number of items. It's got to be open. You got to have a range of participants. They got to have well-defined relationships. Everybody needs to be able to create value, synergistic value, or there's not a value in the ecosystem. Wide range of industries and solving complex problems. We're a big SAP user. This is what an ecosystem looks like. So this is out of one of their slides. They got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 categories of partners. Business networks, implementation services, platform, channels to market, add-on, bolt-on innovation partners and evangelists. And you look at the numbers of companies that they've done. This is what an ecosystem looks like at scale. And this is why a company like SAP can serve a wide range of markets and deliver full end-to-end solutions. So I think when you're always thinking about products, think about what's the broader ecosystem play, because ecosystems are what really change things. And you look at it, of course, the whole mobile computing things about ecosystems. Salesforce.com, if anybody uses it, that's a big ecosystem play. Facebook's an ecosystem play. You, advertisers, third-party developers, all working together to profit from each other or take advantage of each other, the way you look at it. Silicon Valley is an ecosystem. The greater Boston community is an ecosystem. Interestingly to me, home automation is not an ecosystem. You look at what today goes into the home, it's all point-level solutions. And the reason there hasn't been adoption of kind of a solution in home automation is because no one's wrapped it together in an ecosystem. That's going to happen, and when that happens, we're going to have a whole connected home. But today, it's way beyond what a single company can do, and it really needs to be an ecosystem play if you want to move it forward. Who's your real competitor? Anyone heard of Clayton Christensen? If you haven't, you should read his books. Professor at Harvard, most famously wrote books on disruptive innovation. And one of the things he said is if you're an incumbent in a market, you start servicing a customer base, you then get feedback from the power users who continue to move you up to an ever sophisticated, ever more capable product that ultimately way overshoots the market's requirements. And you do a great job of serving the power users, but you open the door for some little startup company creating a minimum viable product that serves the very bottom of the market. And then they start to get a little bit better, and they start to get a little bit better. And then they're that green line that moves up and surpasses the baseline of the industry, and pretty soon they've disrupted the vast majority of your customer base, and you're relegated to this further and further far-reaching part of the market. So I'll tell you a personal story. When I was at Adept, I ran sales in around 2000, and we went into the tech crash after 2000. And prior to that, 80% of our revenues came from electronics customers in the US. And we saw the tech crash and revenues fell off during the downturn, and we thought, okay, we just got to hang through this downturn and wait for it to come back up. Never came back up. Because in about a 5-year period, China moved from making crappy little toys and garments and built a level of sophistication that passed a threshold of capability in manufacturing. And once it passed a threshold that could then build cell phones and computer products and other more sophisticated electronics products, the industry switched. And we lost half our revenues over a 3-year period because all of our electronics customers closed shop and moved to China and took advantage of it. I thought we were competing against Epson and Yamaha and Denso. We were competing against cheap labor. And that kind of blindsided us. That's disruptive innovation. iRobot with vacuum cleaners, yeah, they stink. If you're a aficionado who vacuums, wants to get every speck on the ground. But watch out, vacuum cleaner companies, they've got 20% of the market now because they can serve the bottom end of the market, and they're getting better and better every year. I think collaborative robots are there today. Most industrial robots kind of look at it as just kind of a pain in the ass segment. You got to put a product in just so you can say you got a full product suite. They don't do most of what we'd want them to do, but in the long run, that's going to be a big area. Tesla, the one I like is this last one, Uber. And so Uber comes in and disrupts taxi cabs, classic disruption from the side. They're about to get disrupted by Waymo and autonomous vehicles that are going to completely change the ride-sharing model because they're going to eliminate the labor that makes up the vast majority of the cost. So you got one disruption going to be followed by a second disruption. Next question is, what's your network effect? Network effects are really kind of simple in digital. You start with users, they create data, you have algorithms that use that data, you refine the service you deliver based off of all that, and because you have a better service, you get more users that then give you more data, that allow you to refine your algorithms, allow you to get better service, more users, and you start getting into this crazy flywheel that generates unbelievable margins and unbelievable revenues. Lots of companies employ it. That's the Google model. That's the Facebook model. Autonomous vehicles is a game about how do you get more and more user data to get better and better. I like Waze. Anybody use Waze to drive around? Waze is an awesome network effect. It basically tracks your phones in the car and allows you to just see how traffic patterns are going. They integrate that into an algorithm that allows you to do much better predictive traffic patterns and navigation. And it's worthless if you got 10 or 20 users. But if you got 1 billion users, it's incredibly powerful because you've got an enormous rich data set. Tile is another example. All these are really great example of network effect. Really powerful in digital, always good to look for that. Last question, and then I'll wrap up on enterprise customers. What's your business model? This is a business model canvas. If anyone's in the startup community, you probably have seen one of these before. This is by Alexander Ostweiler or something, a guy from Europe. You just type in business model canvas, you'll find it. Kind of talks about what's the classic interconnects between customers and resources and expenses, and how does that translate into how you can make money. It's a great exercise if you haven't gone through it. But kind of to me, robots are kind of 4 classic business model opportunities. Traditionally, it's been the most classic of all, which is you sell a robot for a large capital expenditure, you get the money, you may have some service associated with it, and that's how you make money. And most of stuff that goes into manufacturing plants operates by that principle. The problem is it's really lumpy. When you get a good quarter, it's great, but then people are digesting it and you don't have any sales for a while. So VCs don't like it. VCs have been pushing to a model that they pioneered, Salesforce.com pioneered, and has been really rampant in software, which is subscriptions. This is a robot from Savioke, their Relay, which is sold on a subscription model, and most VC-funded robot startups seem to want to have some kind of subscription model, where essentially you're getting a monthly fee. You're renting out your equipment and your solution for a monthly fee. You need to have a solution to do this, and you have to have a lot of money because you have to fund the capital investment and then amortize it as your customers pay the rent for it. In the long run, it's a more profitable model. In the short term, it takes a lot more money because you got to seed the capacity. The third big business model is what Intuitive Surgical does, made most famous by Gillette and by HP, which is you sell the razor and get the razor blade business forever. In HP's case, you get these high margin inkjets that sell for 90% gross margin. You're locked into their product solution. So it's really about how many platforms can get into the marketplace, and the more razors you can get out there, the more razor blades you can do. And it's really about adoption. If you look up Intuitive Surgical's financials, you'll just be astounded how much money they make, largely driven by this model. And then the last business model is about data, made popular, of course, by Facebook, Google, Snapchat, anybody who's in the digital economy. They want to sell the data. And an example is in robotics is what Red Zone Robotics did. They had an inspection system for infrastructure pipes, and their robots would go through the pipes, inspect them all, collect all the data, and then they would sell that data to municipalities about what pipes needed to be fixed. So 4 different business models. So let me finish up with a couple of slides on enterprise. We call it speed of digital. Jabil started as a contract manufacturer. Companies came to us 30 years ago with a product, set of work instructions, everything to build it, and they asked us to quote it and apply labor and make it. We didn't have to do really much else other than figure out a cheap way to do that. Over time, we've had to build an entire product lifecycle engineering solution from the earliest stages of ideation full through end-of-life support and delivery. And just kind of as I kind of walk through these things, we help companies with a brand strategy, product strategies, even business strategies. We do the ideation for them. And all these services we have are all a la carte. So it's not like you have to buy into our ecosystem, but we can really help accelerate products. And one of the things we find is companies usually wait too long before they engage someone like us, because we can really help you through the early stages of the product. We've got amazing capabilities to take things through the design, regulatory, value-added engineering, design for manufacturability, design for reliability. How do you make sure you pick components that aren't going to go obsolete? Or how do you create bombs that are going to be robust and reliable? To full NPI process, test instructions, work instructions, quality planning, help you through the process development, EBT, DBT, all of kind of the bring it through the NPI process all the way up. And then lastly, of course, how do you scale it? And how do you, what's the right manufacturing strategy for you? And so, one of the key things is that if you want to move at the speed of digital, it's really about how do you leverage what you're really good at, and then how do you take advantage of people who can help you get there along the way. And last one relative to enterprise customers is how do you sell to them? So enterprise customers really are about, how many things I got there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. So global, of course, they generally have a divisional or business unit structure. They have well-established standards for their infrastructure and IT. They're very sophisticated in their buying process, and they have mission-critical operations. You can't screw them up. So, those 5 elements kind of define what an enterprise customer looks like. But what's positive about it is we go through a very predictable process. We start with a proof of concept, we pilot it, prove it out, and then we figure out how do we scale it through an approved vendor list. So 4 questions you really need to ask yourself. One is, what problem am I really solving? And it's really important to differentiate between I'm solving a individual use case or I'm solving something that's a standard problem to the company, because there's a huge difference, and you can spend a lot of time chasing something that goes nowhere. It's great if it's aligned to a customer. It's always important to make sure it's got an importance and it's got timing. So one is making sure you get the problem definition right and understanding it, because you could go down a rat hole and never come out. Second thing is, who's your sponsor? And sponsorship is enormously important if you're going to sell to an enterprise customer. Are they corporate or are they divisional? Where do they sit in the organization? Do they personally have credibility? Are they an agent of change or are they an agent of the status quo? And do they really have money that can fund it? So make sure you get your sponsor right. Third is there is a very rigorous qualification process. You need to understand it, what matters to the customer, how are we going to measure the success, and how are we going to ensure that this is proven so that we can take it to the next level. Because we don't want to solve a problem. We want to solve something that we can scale across the organization, because it's kind of meaningless to go do a point level solution. So we're looking for things we can scale. And then the last thing comes down to how do we proliferate it. It's about how do you get onto an approved vendor list. We're going to care about global support. We're going to care about whether you can actually meet our needs to scale. We're going to care about whether you take cybersecurity seriously. We're going to care what the terms and conditions are. So it's a pretty rigorous process, but I can tell you it's in many cases it's worth the journey. We've got 15,000 CNCs in operation today, and 80% come from the same supplier. We got thousands of molding machines. Again, it's an 80-20 rule. And surface mount assembly equipment is a 90-10 in terms of the split. So we generally scale things that matter. So I'll end on this. I like this. Former boss used to always say to me, think big, start small, fail fast. And there's a guy named Eric Ries who wrote a book called The Lean Startup. Any of you who are in the startup community, read it. It's about getting to a minimal viable product and going through a really fast iteration cycle. At the end of the day, it's about how do you go through the learning fast. I would say that as I look at the companies that I talk to, all of them need to focus better. It's really hard to do, but it's about really tight focus. I tell people, if you want to make $1 billion business, you got to solve a really, really small problem exceptionally well and then scale it. You don't scale before you really understand the problem. Align to a market, figure out user experience, what's your network, what's your ecosystem look like, how do you create a business model that makes sense, and find partners. Because you can't do it all, and this is a race. And the companies that are gonna win are the ones who get in first and establish themselves first, and they're the ones who have the best partnerships that allow them to get to market quickest and get established quickest. So, thank you.
We have probably time for one or two questions, if we can do it quick. Yes?
Yeah. So the question's about intellectual property. Huge thing that we think about all the time. Certainly we operate 20 factories, 30 factories in China. It's an enormous, actually, selling point for us because we take IP very seriously. Companies like us, if you deal with the right companies, we're not interested in product IP. We don't file any patents. We don't do anything related to products. We don't do any products. What we do is we deliver solutions, manufacturing solutions. So we basically create a manufacturing solution for your product. So we don't worry at all. We don't have any agreements where we have any rights to the product IP that we work with. Secondly, but we don't help you get your IP filed, so we don't have those kind of services. One of the things we do as a manufacturer strategy is that we have what we call a work cell model. So we take, because we work with a lot of competitors in our world, when you get to our level, you kind of gets consolidated pretty quickly. We dedicate cross-functional teams to customers. So there's a wall between any levels of companies so that we can ensure that the expertise is in one captured place rather than permeated across the company. Okay.
So with that, we're going to have to wrap it up because we want to stay on schedule here. I'd like to thank John Dulchinos for presenting today, and very interesting presentation. And if you have any other questions, maybe you can catch him in the hall. We're going to be moving into the next session in fairly rapid order. Thank you very much. That's great, John. Thanks. Thank you very much.